Hey everyone, I'm Tim. I'll be taking you through the next part of the game development workshop. We'll be using what we've learned in JavaScript so far to start creating our Flappy Spaceship game. So here's a quick demo of the game that you should have by the end of the workshop. So we have our spaceship here, which is a little circle that I'm controlling with the up arrow key. And every time I press the arrow key, it's going to move up and then fall back down on its own. If I hit the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen, the spaceship's going to crash. And if I hit one of the planets, it'll also crash. So the aim of the game is to get the spaceship as far as possible beyond the planets and get as many points as you can. So let's talk about how we're going to create our game. So we're going to be using a library for JavaScript called P5 to do this. So libraries are something that give us more features for a particular programming language. In our case, we're going to be adding to the normal JavaScript language by using the functions and things provided inside P5. So JavaScript on its own doesn't have any easy way of putting shapes and text and images onto a screen, but with P5 we can easily do this to create our game. So P5 gives us this canvas in a web page where we can draw things and easily put things onto the screen. So for instance, we can put circles, rectangles, lines, even sound effects if we really wanted to. But with normal JavaScript this would be a little bit tricky. So the whole idea is to make this as easy as possible. We're going to be using our library called P5. So let's head to the editor now. We've got this linked down below. So when you open up the editor, it'll look something a little bit like this. I've already added in the extra 2 lines here from the template, but otherwise it should look exactly the same as this. So at the top here we have 2 buttons, a play and a stop button, which will run our code and also stop our code. We obviously have our editor down here where we write in our code, and on the right side here we have our preview window, which when we click our play button will show us what our canvas looks like. So let's go through our starter code now. So at the top here we have 2 variables defined, gravity and lift. Don't worry about those just yet. We're going to cover those a little bit later once our spaceship actually starts to do something. But more importantly, down here we have 2 functions, a function setup and a function draw. So setup gets called once when you click on the play button and to start running your code, and it runs everything inside here exactly 1 time. So here we have our create canvas command, which takes in 2 numbers. The first one is the width of our canvas in pixels, and the second number represents the height in pixels. So at the moment they're both set to 400, so we end up with a square that's 400 pixels wide and 400 pixels tall. But if I change this to be, say, 200 pixels wide and 400 tall, it becomes a lot skinnier. Likewise, if I was to change our height to, say, 800, it'll become even taller. But we're going to stick to around 400 by 400 for the game. So the next function down here is the draw function, and unlike the setup function which gets called only once, the draw function gets called multiple times over and over again once the setup function is finished. So when we click our play button, it calls setup, and then once setup's finished, it calls draw and does everything inside draw. And then once draw finishes, it calls itself again and again and again, which updates the canvas every time. So this is where the majority of our code is going to end up going. So for now we just have our background command, which takes in a single number, and what this does is colors our canvas to be a particular background color. So for the moment we've got the number 40 in there, which is this dark grey color, but we can change it to be any number between 0, which would be completely black, to the maximum value of 255, which would be white. If you're feeling fancy, you can also give it 3 numbers instead of 1. So if you give it 3 numbers, you'd be telling it how much red, green, and blue to mix together to create the color. So if I give it, say, 150, 85, 45, we're going to end up with this sort of brown orangey color. But if I change it to be 50, say 185 and 145, you're going to get this sort of greenish color here. So again, each of these is going to be between 0 and 255, representing the red, the green, and the blue amount. But we're going to stick with probably just a shade of grey and stick to the number 40, but feel free to change it if you want to. So let's talk about objects again. So hopefully from the previous videos, which you should have watched, if you haven't already, go back and take a look. You should know that objects are a way of storing more complicated things other than just numbers or strings inside a single variable. So objects are a way of collecting multiple types of data together and giving it some more meaning. So for instance, if we think of just an ordinary rectangle, what sort of properties or what sort of things might we know about it? So we might know something such as its length, the width maybe, it might have a color. It also might have some sort of location, possibly like one of the corners. And it might even have a name. So in code, this might look a little bit like this. So we'd have our name, rectangle, and then we have these 5 properties associated with it. So we have our length of 3, our width of 2, we have our color, which is blue, but that's stored as a string instead of a number this time. We also have our location stored as 2 separate coordinates, so an x value and a y value. And then we can easily access and change these values anytime we want to by writing rectangle dot and then the name of the property we want to access or change. So rectangle.length to change the length, or rectangle.color to change the color. So let's talk about how we're going to draw shapes in P5. So P5 uses a particular convention which we need to make sure we understand before we start drawing shapes. So at the very top left corner we have coordinate 0, 0. This is kind of like the origin on a normal axis. And then as we move across in the right to the right, our x value is going to increase from 0 all the way to our maximum of 400, or whatever the width was that you've defined for your canvas. And as we move down the page, our y value starts at 0 and then increases to the maximum, which again is going to be 400 unless you've changed it in yours. So to draw a shape, let's just stick with circles for now since they're quite easy to use. We'd write the circle command, give it an x value, a y value, and then a diameter. So let's head back to our editor and have a go at putting in a circle. So if we head to our draw section in the function draw and type in circle, and then we give it our x value, so let's say 50, and our y value, let's say it's also 50, and then our diameter, and let's say we go for 20 pixels. So if we run our code, we should see our little circle appear here at coordinate 50 across and 50 down, and its diameter is 20 pixels across, 20 pixels wide. If I change it to be position 0, 0, we should see it appear slightly off the screen. This is because we define circles in P5 to be the center of the circle is where the x and the y values are intercepting. So if I also make this our maximum of 400 and 400, it'll also appear but down at the bottom right corner this time. If I was to change one of these to be something like minus 40, 40, and still 20, it won't appear at all because remember this is 0, 0. So if we give it an x value that's negative, it's going to appear somewhere off to the left here, and we can't see it. There's also a lot of other shapes we can use. Feel free to have a look at the P5 website, which has a really good page explaining on all the different shapes you can draw, as well as lots of examples. So let's talk about making our spaceship. So as you probably guessed, we're going to be using an object to store all the different properties and attributes for our spaceship. So have a think about where we'd put our code, and think about what sort of properties would make sense with the numbers we've given you here to start with. So there's a few things you want to consider. You want to consider things like its position in terms of an x and y coordinate. It's going to have some sort of size associated with it. And it's going to have some sort of starting speed which we're going to change over time. So using this as a guide, work out which ones here belong to which ones of these properties. And we'll go through the solution in the next video.